Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Biblical Bookworm. My name is Elizabeth, and today we'll continue with my summary of the biblical series by Jordan Peterson. I'll give you a quick overview of this summary. It will consist of 3 parts. You're currently watching part 2. Part 1 are Jordan Peterson's idea on the significance of the Bible, hints that something supernatural exists, the nature of God, and the nature of humans. Part 2 is going to be about mental health and his advice on how to be successful. And in part 3, I'm going to summarize the main lessons from specific biblical stories. A big part of the biblical series is about different mental illnesses and how to prevent them or how to treat them. First, let's get to depression and general dissatisfaction with life. Let's start with the question if it's good that you are, or would it have been better if you had never existed? Or, as Dr. Peterson puts it, is something better than nothing? He argues that the answer we get from the Bible is yes, something is better than nothing, as after every time God created something, he said that it was good. And then Dr. Peterson talks about how a good life isn't supposed to be utopian. He explains that if you lived in a utopian world and were watching TV all day, you'd start cutting yourself just for entertainment, as at a certain point, people have so much they desire deprivation. Also, a certain amount of trouble forces the best out of you, and the fact that you're fragile is a precondition for your heroism. He defines life as the voluntary taking on of great challenges or pushing yourself against danger. And being alive is being in trouble. Quote, "So again, life seems to be the voluntary taking on of great challenges. Maybe that's better than happiness. It's certainly more noble. But I think happiness, like if it comes along, man, great, wonderful. But the idea that that's what you should be for, in some sense, just seems to me, if that's what life is for, then maybe it shouldn't be. And so maybe there are better things than happiness. And so you can't judge being on the basis of the ratio of suffering to pleasure." He says that it's heroic to accept the conditions of your own existence, and Christianity is just that, namely accepting the tragic preconditions of life and acting despite them. He also talks about how to actually do that, how to deal with the challenges life throws at you. He calls the ability to do so wisdom. Now, as there are ways to make life much worse, there also have to be ways to make it much better. And one advice he gives is to act as if being was good, as that will make it a little bit more true. Probably the phrase he repeated most in the biblical series is to treat yourself as if you had value and to take care of yourself as if you actually liked yourself. This must be a very common problem because I feel like he repeated that at least once in every episode. He also says that if you treat your problems as God's responsibility and not yours, things get much worse, and that it's better to take responsibility for them and work on them sooner than later, as systems go terribly out of control unless you stop them when they are mildly out of control. He says that it's a good habit to ask yourself every day what is something stupid you often do and what you could easily fix, and after figuring that out, to change it. His advice on how to be successful is also related with this topic, which I will talk about in a separate part of the summary. When it comes to mental health in general, Dr. Peterson says that, quote, "The world is too complicated for you to keep it organized all by yourself. You just cannot do it. So we outsource the problem of sanity. It's very intelligent that we outsource the problem of sanity because sanity is an impossibly complex problem. The way that we manage the incredibly complex is we have a very large number of brains working simultaneously on the problem all the time. So basically that means that humans need human interaction, or in his words, sociological structures to stay mentally healthy." Then Dr. Peterson addresses the situation where you see someone else struggle and you want to help them. And there he says that the best way to do that is by listening to them, because most people can't think if they're not talking, and they can only talk if they have someone to talk to. At the same time, if someone refuses help, there's usually no way you can help them. And then there are 3 pieces of advice that don't fit in any other category, but I think it's important to mention them. Assume stupidity before assuming malevolence. In order to overcome an addiction, you have to find something better, which is why people often overcome addiction after a religious experience. And lastly, to treat anxiety, you expose people little by little to what they're afraid, which makes them more brave, not less afraid. At many different points during the biblical series, Dr. Peterson talks about how to be successful and how to make life work out for you. He deduced from the Sermon on the Mountain that if you do the hardest thing you can conceptualize, then your life will work out for you. Or to quote him directly, what's quite interesting is that if you do what is that you're called upon to do, which is to lift your eyes up above the mundane, daily, selfish, impulsive issues that might upset you, and you attempt to enter into a contractual relationship with that which you might hold in the highest regard, whatever that might be, to aim high and to make that important above all else in your life, that fortifies you against the vicissitudes of existence like nothing else can. I truly believe that's the most practical advice that you could possibly receive. He also says that the nobler the aim, the better your life, and that the most enjoyable part for humans about achieving a goal is the process of getting to that goal rather than actually achieving it. And what makes people happy about achieving a goal is that they now have another goal to achieve. On the other hand, people suffer if they don't have a lofty ambition. And then he talks about how to be successful, and here he sees a strong connection between success and sacrifice. He explains that the difference between the successful and the unsuccessful is that the former sacrifice. Dr. Peterson then defines sacrifice. He says that it's the same as commitment and that it's a deal with the future. By giving up a desire of the present, we get a desire of the future, so for example, success. We find an example of what not to do in the story of Jacob and Esau, where Esau sells his birthright for a bowl of lentils. That is an example of sacrificing the future for a current desire. He also touches upon the promise in the Bible, "Ask and it shall be given you." In Dr. Peterson's experience, this is true as long as you want what you say you want. He defines wanting something as being willing to sacrifice whatever it takes to obtain it. And as a sacrifice is also connected to risk in some way, I'd like to read this quote on taking on risk from the biblical series. You have a path A that has catastrophes, and you have a path B that has catastrophes. And you don't get to have the no catastrophe path, but you can get to pick which one. That's really something. If you know that there's terrible risk associated with everything that you do and don't do, then you can afford to take some risks. Dr. Peterson also gives possible reasons for why people are not successful, and here he says that one reason people don't get what they want is that they don't figure out what it is. And defining what you want to achieve, so defining the criteria for success, also defines the criteria for failure at the same time, which is why people avoid to do it. And a last piece of advice from the biblical series that didn't fit the previous topics is that being proud of who you are stops you from being who you could be. So stay humble. That's been part 2 of my summary of the biblical series. Part 3 will continue next week. See you then. God bless and bye.